A spade bit earth where peaches had fallen soft. Under lantern hush, names folded into dirt as if the ground kept a ledger kinder than paper. A door settled, and iron learned patience. A coat still warm on a peg forgot the shape of the man who wore it. The candle leaned, and ordinary things began to keep the count. Before we step inside this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and what is the time there right now, because we want to know how fast our story has to reach you. The orchard wore evening like a damp shirt, sweet with the rot of fruit, quiet with the work that waits for moon. Iron latch, candle gutter, the slow breath of soil, each sound set itself down where words would not fit. The big house watched from paneled shadow. Beyond the washyard, cabins on piers held their heat and their secrets. Grain dust from the bin shed drifted in the lamplight like a patience you could see. There is a silence that presses. It adds, it does not explain. Fallen peaches bruised into sugar, and bees thought better of them. The ground bruised too, taking prints and learning names. Hinge mouths in the cellar doors opened and closed with the modesty of iron that has seen worse. A pewter ladle knocked the rim of a pail, and the sound traveled a short distance, then found a pocket of leaves and slept. Fire does not scream, it claims. The candle in the window bowed once, then held itself very still. In such weather, the heart moves slower because the air is already full. Lantern glass filmed at the top where breath cannot reach. The coat on the peg cooled from warm to merely cloth. A key ring forgot who it belonged to and remembered only weight. The spade waited upright like a man kneeling. Names did not need to be said. The ground has another way to hear. The ledger in the big house could measure ounces and hours. The orchard ledger counted a different currency: footsteps, turns, and the number of breaths between one small decision and the next. The ground remembers. Warm night air carries sap and iron, lamp oil and brine carried inland from a river mouth that does not apologize for distance. The big house keeps to paneled rooms and tall shadows. Its windows hold their breath. Glass has learned that trick in summers like this. Whitewash on the kitchen house pushes back the dark until the dark learns manners. Quarters sit beyond the washyard, raised on brick piers so floodwater can pass beneath without asking permission. Paths thread sand to sand, marked by wheel ruts that stay damp where the evening will not let go. Inside the big house, ledgers wear leather like proper citizens. They keep accounts in columns that believe themselves moral. The moral economy walks from house to yard and back again. Ounces, hours, obedience, corrected and recorded. Over the orchard, rows comb a soft slope, each tree teaching the next how to stand and pretend it chose the place. A pewter ladle rings the lip of a barrel. The sound balances a candle flame at the other end of the room. Quills scratch not because there is truth, but because there is ink. Doors swell in late season Georgia. Hinges grind to make their opinions known. The overseer taps his cane on plank and sand, and the cane writes its little maps of correction everywhere it goes. Tobacco breath replaces conversation where conversation might have been. Tobacco is a kind of grammar here. Rations move like liturgy. A scoop shaved thin is doctrine. A second ladle is sin. The ground learns the difference by the weight of footsteps to and from the storehouse. The orchard keeps its own minutes. Fruit falls and makes a low sound like a word a child tries and gives up. Wasps argue with sweetness and then leave their arguments mid-sentence. The slope remembers one wet year when boards had to be nailed across the muddy dip. The boards left a scar even when the grass came back. When the bell from the kitchen calls, it is iron poured into the night. Sound cools into shape as it travels. Fire does not scream, it claims. The lamp wavers, then settles as if scolded. Windows learn to hold breath because breath fogs them and tells on everyone. In the cabins on piers, a woman mends by lamplight and ties a knot at the end of thread as if the knot could hold more than cloth. A man rubs oil into a hinge without waking it and hears the hinge say, "Thank you," in its own metal way. A boy counts the steps from stoop to orchard edge and forgets to stop where he is meant to. Counting is not just numbers. It is a way to live through something without letting it take the language. The ground remembers. The big house keeps a Bible near the ledger, both open easily, both close with weight. In one, names wear holiness. In the other, names wear decimals. A third book exists without paper. The one the night writes into the dirt with prints and drips and the slow press of wheels. It is a book without ink and therefore hard to burn. Iron latch, candle gutter, wheel ruts damp. The chapter headings write themselves. This is not a place without order. It is a place where order has forgotten whom it serves. He was used to cellars, keys, and the orchard's quiet tools. The kind of work that knows thresholds by touch and learns locks by breathing near them. Stillness read as absence to those who needed it to. To those who watched truly, stillness was his power. Cloth rasped on wood when he moved a sack, a sound like a saw under a blanket, not complaint, instruction. He kept a folded kerchief in his pocket and unfolded it only when breath needed to be measured. Memory did not tell him tales. It arranged weights. A mother took a second ladle on a day when the heat would not let go, and a cane decided she needed a new hymn to sing on her back. He watched the cane's grammar and learned each line by heart. A brother marched at dusk, and the road forgot his name faster than the house did. The house forgot quickly. The ground remembered longer. It was not hope. It was accounting, without paper. His eyes did not ask to be seen. They took a census of hinges, windows, and the way doors settled after being persuaded. The cellar taught him iron's moods, which latch closed honest and which one lay about it. The orchard taught him distance by scent, peach in rot, cedar when the boxes came, oil when a tool had been polished to look like mercy. He could count in steps, in breaths, in the length of a candle after the bell. He could count the names of those the ledger misfiled under silence. The names liked to be kept warm. He did that. He carried keys, but they did not sleep with him. Keys knew the wrong kind of truth. Thresholds knew the right kind. He measured thresholds by how they behaved when watched. He let doors know he was there without making them perform. A quiet step is not an apology. It is an agreement. On his tongue, numbers tasted like iron. He kept them under that tongue until it was time to spend them. The overseer's cane tapped its scripture, and the scoop shaved its doctrine, and he counted both as events like weather, to be observed, endured, and entered into a calendar of corrections. Tobacco breath washed a room in brown, and he learned to move like a thought no one had asked to hear but needed. When a hinge moaned, he remembered it. When a hinge went quiet, he remembered it twice. Memory is a ledger that does not accept edits. He wrote in it with breath. He did not look for witnesses and did not want them. This kind of counting cannot stand applause. In the cabins on piers, he sat with his back to the wall and felt the house, the yard, the slope, and the orchard press their weights through the boards into his spine. He let them. He made a list. iron latch, candle gutter, damp orchard loam, fallen peaches, grain dust in light, silence pressing like soil. He waited until the list told him what order it wanted. The ground remembers. Order has two faces here, one at the table, where the master speaks in ounces and favors, one in the dirt, where hands speak in rows and hours. The overseer stands with his cane crossed and taps time into the boards. Tap means enough. Tap means less. Tap means the word justice has been weighed and found heavy enough to be shaved. The scoop learns to lift more slowly when the room is watching, and more cleverly when it is not. The ledger looks on and keeps what it is paid to keep. Arithmetic in the yard is a liturgy. Scoop on grain, quill scratch, cane tap. Tobacco breath making a fog in a place that should have light. Hush held tight like a belt on an empty belly. Punishments dressed as corrections. Corrections dressed as care. The orchard follows suit. Work metered. Tools signed in and out. Bins and cellars locked as if iron were an honest friend when men are not. Hinges grind in agreement with their own use. Doors swell to show they can resist and then yield to prove they know their place. In the parlor, piety sharpens itself on news of obedience. In the yard, arithmetic licks the same blade and calls it clean. A scoop shaved thin is a small sermon with a hard gospel. A withheld hour buys a beating later. Even the pewter ladle has learned to ring in two notes. One for enough, one for almost. The difference is the same distance as the space between a name in ink and a name in a mouth. He moves through this like a shadow that knows the map better than the men who drew it. Cloth whispers across wood. Breath measures the small hesitations, who approaches a door and waits, who enters and owns. A quiet step at thresholds, so the threshold will recall this courtesy later. He counts the cane's taps and converts them to nights. Nights convert themselves to the patience of soil. Fire does not scream, it claims. The lamps claim the hours one by one until the line of light thins like a lie under pressure. Locks click, ledgers close, doors seat themselves with the little sigh of houses that believe their own good behavior. Order at table has had its way. Order in dirt takes notes and does not comment. He notes where a hinge has learned to hold, where a latch would prefer to forget, where a door has begun to love the shape of shut. Arithmetic is a blade. He learns which part of it does not cut hands that know how to carry it. The ground remembers. By noon, the shutters clapped without wind, then held their tongues as if the house had been reminded of manners. A lantern went blind with its own breath, glass fogging from within, hiss thinning to a cough and then to a lesson in silence. Wasps abandoned fruit heavy with sugar. Sweetness went unguarded on the ground. A dog pointed at nothing and swallowed its note like a child corrected in church. The slope listened. The rose listened back. There is a silence that presses. A ration slip drank a wet footprint by the bin shed. Ink bled until a name softened to weather. A man traded to smudge. The hinge in the cider loft moaned once and then considered discretion. Peach rot carried its warm perfume, a sweetness that remembered every hand that planted and none that harvested fairness. In the cabins, a child's new couplet made rhythm of warning. Count the names, keep the ground, and no one told the child what the rhyme knew. Rumor walked the yard with its hat off. The well, some said, had turned a little sour at dawn and came right by noon. A charm at the sill, a cedar shaving and a red thread, appeared and disappeared between one pass of the cane and the next. Lantern sputter, hinge moan, rations slip smudge, peach rot sweetness, whispers like cloth. These were weights, not words. The 5 closest to the work tallied them without speaking, each sign laid on the chest like another small stone that helps a body not to float away. By dusk, the orchard kept a different posture. Leaves skittered low, though the air was still. The whitewash found a gray it did not remember from morning. Far off, a pewter ladle rang the rim like a bell mislaid from a tower. The candle in the wash-house window bowed once and pretended not to. The ground remembers the first time a place decides it will not lie any longer. It writes that decision in damp, in ruts, in the quiet that follows, after noise has agreed to leave. They named it weather first, because weather cannot be indicted, then season, because seasons have calendars, but not faces. Cramps came like a rope pulled through the middle and tied twice. Sweetness turned quarrelsome on the tongue. A sip returned a knotted message to the gut. They sat at the table and found their chairs unfamiliar, as if wood had made a decision in the night and chosen not to carry them comfortably. The doctor arrived with the confidence of bottles and the patience of leather. He opened the case the way a clerk opens a Bible, careful but sure of being right. Bilious humors, he said, and made an alphabet from the color of their eyes and the weight of their breath. A little blood to teach the body humility, calomel to move what was reluctant, bitters to instruct the tongue in respect. He drew a line of red and called it remedy. He measured powders like a clerk measures faith, by the spoon, by the pinch, by conviction. Remedies thinned them. Symptoms refused to confess their names. Cloths folded to lips left pale confessions. Nothing bright, nothing dramatic. Ordinary stains that frighten more because they ask to be believed. Lamps guttered low where talk sagged. A cough tested the boards in the office and kept the echo for later. In ledgers, lines where rations changed learned a kind of shyness and skipped a meal. The quill paused over a place where wages had doubled for harvest help, then moved past with a little blot that grew by itself into a small night. Safer to erase than to know. In bedrooms that smelled of wax and damp wool, a man tried to sleep on his side and found the rope moved with him. He tried his back and discovered the rope could write there too. A spoon met the lip of a bowl and turned back as if the bowl had said a rude thing. He walked the veranda, and the key ring at his belt made smaller sounds than last week. Dogs forgot to bark. The orchard kept its counsel. The slope held its pose like prayer. The doctor spoke in a grammar that made pain tidy. Ag when the air learned bad manners, flux when the body forgot its duty, exhaustion when men needed a word that blamed nothing. He left with his fee, and the bottles remained to supervise. The master counted the steps from bed to door in the small hours and learned that numbers could argue too. Names went unspoken at the table because they felt like stones in the mouth. In the cabins, breath was counted between coughs, and the count did not go loud. The ground remembers what medicine chooses not to read. Moonless did not mean absent light. It meant a different ledger opened, frog bells for lines, the slackening wind for margins, the smell of iron and sap for ink. Threshold night gathered itself without show. Doors learned they were being watched and improved their manners. Hinges answered softly when addressed by the back of a knuckle. Stillness did not apologize. It announced competence. A spare latch pin, kept from a door that forgot to miss it. It lay in the palm with the honesty of a small promise. A coil of wire rolled tight, strong enough to speak in the voice of a hasp. A cedar chip with its clean breath, the kind of scent that does not lie. A length of twine, knotted once and then again, ends left uneven, so the knot would remember being made for a reason. A dull spade with a nick that knew where roots try to teach you patience. Tokens, not weapons. Manners for wood and iron and earth. Steps were counted by the frog bell. From the stoop where soap dries its hands to the wash-house corner, 7. To the cider loft where the hinge likes respect, 4 more. To the bin-shed shadow that keeps a secret even at noon, 3. To the slope's first true fall where the orchard's mouth begins, 5 if you are invited, 6 if you have to ask. Counting is not numbers alone. It is a way to walk without leaving panic behind you, like a footprint. Doors that were watched chose to be grateful. Latches recognized quiet competence and lowered their shoulders. Frames accepted patience in exchange for cooperation. The wind slackened until even leaves forgot to shiver. The dull spade leaned its head and listened to the ground to catch the pitch of roots. Wire rehearsed the dialect of iron until they understood one another. The cedar chip sat where a witness sits, unmoved, exact, breathing truth without force. In the cabins, a kerchief was folded and set east to west, because east to west is how some prayers travel. In the big house, a bottle watched a man pretend sleep. On the slope, a lantern drew a small circle and then a smaller one. Instruction for the eye to believe less and hear more. The tokens lived against skin like sentences not yet spoken. Names gathered behind the teeth and agreed to be counted in breath and not in sound. The ground remembers the weight of a man who walks on purpose. It keeps that measure fresh. Hinges answered softly. Doors learned to be new kinds of doors. The slackening wind hung back like a child who wants to help and fears it will break something. Frog bells made the hour advance not like a soldier, like a tide. When everything had prepared itself to be itself, the night allowed work to begin, work small enough to hide in daylight, careful enough to remain a rumor even to those who carried it. Earth parted as if remembering old lessons, spade biting through damp loam, root tangles offering their thin wrists, a wedge knock that learned to sound like a falling fruit. Boards set where boards had no business and learned the orchard's grammar anyway. Weight arranged without spectacle. No shout, no show. Only control. Names were counted in breath, not said. Each press of soil back into place belonged to a name the ledger had folded wrong. Each tamp was a syllable the ground had been waiting to hear. Iron was taught to keep counsel. Wire told the hasp a story about loyalty, and the hasp believed it. Lantern shadow practiced humility on the underside of leaves and did not report what it saw. The slope accepted its new sentence with the courtesy of land that has seen all kinds of sentences come and go. Fruit fell and hit a seam. Roots learned a new neighbor and said nothing to water. Stillness grew thick, a substance, not a lack. The night closed its book without creasing a page. Fire does not scream, it claims. The candle in the wash-house window bent, then held straight, as if to say the hour had been witnessed and would not be repeated in words. The ground remembers. Morning found the rows as they preferred to be, straight, patient, groomed by the night's brief hand. Fruit dropped and covered a seam with the generosity of sweetness. Dogs forgot the thing they nearly knew and slept with their noses to their tails. Work resumed in the shape it always wears. Hands at buckets, backs in their old negotiations with slope and time. Counting continued behind closed mouths, a private arithmetic that asks for no audience and keeps its inkless ledger under the tongue. There is a silence that presses. It adds, it does not explain. The cabins aired their quilts and learned the day's warmth. The washhouse lamp was trimmed to a hair. The spade leaned clean in a corner and passed for innocence. Leaf skitter came low on bare ground where no wind walked. Candle stubs marked a night in the cabins, little vertebrae of light left along the window rails. A key ring sat idle on a nail and made a smaller circle than it boasted last week. Names repeated inwardly, one to each breath, until the chest knew the order and did not need the mouth. The slope closed around its new sentences, the way a wound makes plans with skin. A seam held because the ground had agreed to remember. Wheels cut their same ruts. Boots agreed not to notice the place where they stepped twice for no reason. The orchard took note of nothing and everything. Fruit fell. Juice darkened a small patch as if writing a letter no eye could learn. The day wore its hat correctly and passed inspection. The ground remembers. A neighbor brought his hat in his hands and left with a phrase, "Fever." Another borrowed a story called Providence and paid nothing back. Taint came next, because Taint loves a room that will look away from particulars. At the courthouse, ink tidied what the tongue feared. "Wasting," the clerk wrote, and the word sat without a face, satisfied to be almost truth. His pen hesitated above a line where rations had doubled, then set down a dot that bled into a blot, then pretended the blot was weather in the paper grain. Safer to erase than to know. Rain stitched the clapboards with thin gray thread, thoughtful, exact, content to work without witness. The bell learned to speak with cloth in its mouth. Rows of husks lay to dry like a chapter taken apart and pinned to sunlight. The ledger closed its leather with a sound that practiced dignity. A page turned with a weight it had not earned. Quills rested in their glass and pretended they were tools and not accomplices. The overseer's cane made a smaller map on the floor, the borders drawn cautious, as if geography could plead innocence. The master's chair was changed for another, and the discomfort proved its talent for travel. The Bible remained near the ledger, and both remained near the window, and the window learned a film that invited fewer conclusions. The orchard held its breath and then breathed on schedule. A minute book at the church found a way to record everything that did not matter and nothing that did. It is the talent of institutions to make their own fog and then admire their lanterns. In kitchens and under sheds, women pressed their palms to damp barrels and listened for a note. Children rehearsed a rhyme and were not stopped. Count the names, keep the ground. The ground, which is older than ink, wrote back in weight and in the direction feet prefer without knowing why. Years behave like dust. They gather best where no one looks until light invents them. A child, hunting for shade and beetles, knelt at a root shoulder and found iron sleeping, bent pin, red with the patience of soil. The pin carried the certainty of a small sentence completed. Near the same place, a board scar lay where no fence had ever stood. Wood remembers being asked to do work it was not born for. He touched the scar and felt the heat of a story that had avoided his parents by design. On porches, a line of song persisted without understanding itself. Count the names, keep the ground. Children made a game of the cadence and did not know whose breath they borrowed. In a county room where paper lives, an archivist wrote, "Irregularity in stores," then crossed it once, then crossed the crossing, the page wearing both wounds like an honesty it had not expected to show. A smudged margin note learned to stand between meanings and enjoy the draft. Under peach boughs, the air holds a scent that comes from sugar and iron being left too near each other too long. Bees wrote brief letters and left them open. A boy pocketed the bent pin and did not tell anyone, the way a mouth hides a name to keep it warm. When he walked back through the rows, his feet chose the darker path, though the lighter one looked easier. The slope taught his ankles the old sentence, the ground remembers. Storms make a building breathe. The washhouse door takes in air and lets it go through seams. A hinge finds a low note that suits the weather and sings it without shame. Sometimes the latch lifts and settles without hand. No drama, only a rehearsal by a room that has learned its lines too well to need applause. The scoop hangs empty in the storehouse and looks like a question that forgot its grammar. The 5 are not in ink. Paper keeps what it is paid to keep, and pain bankrupts, slowly. They are present in what their feet taught the slope, a path that remains a little darker after rain, that goes pale like bone in hard sun, that refuses to forget the direction even when men change the names of everything around it. Names are kept there, not letters, weight. The ground remembers more than any neighbor will volunteer. This was not revenge. Revenge is a show and demands a crowd. This was reckoning, counted, quiet, intimate as a hand on wood. A grammar doors and hinges will honor long after sermons grow tired. It was not hope. Hope asks to be seen. Reckoning prefers to be believed. Order at table drew its blade. Order in dirt taught the blade whose throat it belonged to. Ledgers learned to blur. Minutes learned to smile. A child learned to carry iron he did not yet recognize as a sentence already served. If someone stands alone in the orchard at the last blue of evening, they might hear leaf skitter along a root flare in a rhythm older than their name. They might watch the washhouse candle bow once, then hold true, the flame's spine remembering how to be taught and how to refuse. They might feel the slope lean a breath toward them, a weight that is not warning and not comfort. It is only the earth telling what it keeps. The ground remembers.